I can still see the taillights fading into the distance, that sharp red glow cutting through the gray evening air as my daughter drove away. For a few stunned seconds, I just stood there on the shoulder of the road, suitcase at my side, the sound of gravel crunching still echoing in my ears. That was the exact moment I realized something I never thought I would. My own family had left me behind on purpose. Not by mistake, not because of some emergency, but because, in their eyes, I had become a burden too heavy to carry. The air felt colder than it had a moment before, and I remember clutching my jacket tighter around me. My phone buzzed weakly in my hand before shutting off battery dead at the worst possible time. I checked my wallet, $47. No credit card, no charger, no way to call for help. Just me, an old suitcase, and the humiliating truth that the people I loved most in this world had decided they were better off without me. The first emotion that hit was shock, like the world had suddenly tilted sideways. Then bitterness crept in, slow and cutting, as I thought about the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, all dismissed with the slam of a car door and a cloud of dust. It would have been easy to collapse right there on the side of that road, to let the betrayal crush me into silence. But I didn't. As I stood on that deserted stretch of highway, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what was coming next or how I was going to survive the night. But I knew one thing for certain: this was not going to be the end of me. If my daughter thought she had broken me, she was about to learn that she had only set something far stronger in motion. And that's where my story begins. If you've ever wondered how an ordinary woman finds the strength to rise after being pushed to the edge, stay with me, because I'm going to take you back to the beginning and show you exactly how I ended up here and why what came next changed everything. When I think back over the years, it's almost funny how easy it was to convince myself that everything was normal, that this was just how families worked. I raised my daughter, Amanda, on my own after her father walked out when she was 12. We didn't have much, but I stretched every dollar, took extra shifts at the library, and did whatever I had to do to keep a roof over our heads. She never missed a meal, never went to school without clean clothes, and somehow there was always a little something under the tree on Christmas morning. I thought those sacrifices meant something, that one day she'd look back and see how hard I fought for her. In some ways, I think I kept that hope alive longer than I should have. When Amanda became an adult, the pattern slowly began to shift. Though at the time, I told myself it was just growing pains, I was the one who co-signed her first car loan when her credit wasn't strong enough. I was the one who watched her kids for entire weekends so she and her husband could take trips. I was the one slipping $20 bills into her hand at the grocery store, pretending it was extra change I didn't need. There were moments when I thought maybe we were turning a corner. Birthdays when she remembered to call. Holidays when she'd show up, even if it was just for a couple of hours. I would hold on to those moments like fragile glass ornaments, hoping they meant our bond was still intact. But if I'm honest, those bright spots were always overshadowed by the quiet dismissals, the rolled eyes, the subtle reminders that I was useful only when she needed something from me. I can still remember last Thanksgiving. I had spent 2 days cooking a meal big enough for an army, determined to make the house feel warm and welcoming. The table was set, candles lit, the smell of roast turkey filling every corner of the kitchen. Amanda showed up an hour late, sat down without a word, and spent most of the meal scrolling through her phone. I tried to ignore the knot in my chest, tried to remind myself that at least she was there. But by the time dessert came around, She was already gathering her kids and talking about how tired she was. I stood at the sink later that night, scrubbing dishes with tears sliding down my face, wondering when exactly family time had become something I had to beg for. The hardest part was admitting the imbalance. I was always giving, always bending, always making room for her in my life, but I couldn't remember the last time she had done the same for me. It wasn't that I expected grand gestures, I never asked for that. All I wanted was effort, a phone call that wasn't about needing money, an invitation that wasn't centered around what I could provide. And yet, even as the years piled on, I kept waiting for her to remember who I was to her, waiting for her to see me not as a nuisance, but as her mother, the woman who had carried her, raised her, and given her everything I had. That's why the betrayal on that roadside cut so deep. It wasn't a single moment, it was the culmination of years of being overlooked, dismissed, and quietly pushed aside. But as painful as it was, standing there abandoned forced me to see something I'd ignored for too long. I couldn't keep living as though I had no worth outside of what I gave to others. Something inside me was beginning to shift, and I had no idea at the time. But that shift was about to change everything. For the first few hours after Amanda drove away, I felt numb. Betrayal like that doesn't just sting, it hollows you out. But once the initial shock began to fade, another feeling started to creep in. It wasn't despair. It wasn't even fear. It was something fiercer, something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. See, Amanda and Cole always thought of me as harmless, someone who could be brushed aside, taken advantage of, or dismissed without consequence. They had no idea that the woman they had underestimated for so long still had more strength and knowledge tucked away than they could imagine. The truth is, before I became just mom or grandma, I had a life of my own. I worked for nearly 30 years at a community bank, starting as a teller and eventually moving into compliance and fraud prevention. Day in and day out, I learned how to spot forged signatures, trace unusual transactions, and recognize scams. I may have been retired for years, but those instincts never disappeared. That night, after May, the innkeeper, helped me charge my phone, I opened my online banking with shaking hands. My stomach dropped when I saw the alerts: withdrawals I hadn't authorized, transfers I didn't recognize, credit accounts I had never opened. At first, I thought it was identity theft, but as I scrolled further, the pattern became chillingly clear. These weren't random criminals halfway across the world. The charges lined up perfectly with Amanda's recent trips, the spa days she bragged about, the hotel bills in towns she claimed she never visited. My own daughter had been quietly siphoning money from my accounts, forging documents in my name, and using me as her personal bank. And here's the part she never considered: I knew exactly how to track it, document it, and prove it. Every suspicious transfer, every forged form, every so-called co-signed loan she had slipped under my nose, I could piece it all together like a puzzle. In that moment, the bitterness I'd been carrying began to harden into something sharper. Amanda thought she had abandoned me in weakness, but she had no idea she'd left me standing on solid ground I knew better than anyone. I wasn't just some helpless grandmother stranded on the side of the road. I was a woman with decades of financial expertise and the evidence I needed to hold her accountable. I pulled out a small notebook I always kept in my suitcase, a habit from my banking days, and began writing everything down. Dates, amounts, account numbers. I listed every detail I could remember while the memories were still fresh. By the time I closed the cover, I realized I wasn't powerless at all. I had a paper trail. I had knowledge, And, most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight shift off my chest. Amanda may have believed she had broken me, but she had only handed me the tools to fight back. What I didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning, because as I dug deeper, I was about to stumble across something even darker than I had imagined, something that would prove her betrayal ran far deeper than stolen money. At first, I thought the missing money was the worst of it. Losing my savings was devastating enough, but at least that was tangible. Money could be tracked, accounts could be closed, and fraud could be reported. But as I dug deeper, I realized Amanda's betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal, calculated, and far more cruel than I had let myself believe. I started combing through old documents I had scanned onto my laptop years ago. Tax forms, loan agreements, even copies of my will. And that's when the pieces began to click in a way that made my stomach turn. Lines that looked familiar weren't familiar at all. Signatures in my name looked rushed, uneven, as though someone had tried to imitate my handwriting but couldn't quite match it. Amanda hadn't only been draining my accounts, she had been forging my name on official documents. A home equity loan I never applied for. A credit line tied to my social security number. Even medical forms that listed her as my financially responsible party. I sat there in the dim light of that rented room above May's Inn, scrolling through PDFs with trembling hands, realizing my daughter had spent months, maybe years, setting up a life where I wasn't just being taken advantage of. I was being erased. And as if that weren't enough, the lies kept unraveling. I found emails buried in my spam folder from debt collectors I'd never heard of. Notices for bills in cities I'd never visited. One email even threatened legal action for non-payment of a loan I didn't know existed. Every new discovery felt like a punch to the chest, each one knocking the air out of me a little more. I had spent years telling myself Amanda was simply careless, that she leaned on me because life was hard, that her sharp words were just stress talking. But looking at those documents, the truth hit me like ice water. This wasn't carelessness. This was intent. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had been building a system to strip me of everything, not just my money, but my identity, my security, even my independence. I remember sitting at that desk, the sound of the rain beating against the window, feeling the sadness wash over me in waves. Grief not just for Frank, but for the daughter I thought I still had. I had raised her, loved her, sacrificed for her. And this was what I was left with, a stranger who saw me not as a mother, but as a resource to exploit. But sadness can only carry you so far before it starts to harden into something else. By the time I closed my laptop, the grief had burned itself into anger. Real anger. The kind that doesn't just make you cry, it makes you plan. Amanda thought she had buried me under her lies and her forged signatures. She thought I was too naive, too weak, too dependent to ever piece it together. But she had forgotten who I was. She had forgotten the decades I spent unraveling scams, tracing fraud, and spotting inconsistencies for a living. I wasn't broken. I wasn't helpless. I was furious. That was the night I made my decision. If Amanda thought she could steal my life out from under me, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I wasn't going to sit quietly while she erased me. I was going to fight back, and this time, I would be the one writing the ending. The morning after I uncovered the forged documents, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, of course, but it was sharpened into something useful, a blade I could finally wield. I wasn't going to confront Amanda with tears or pleading. That's what she expected. No. This time I would meet her on ground she never imagined I could stand on. Step 1 was gathering proof. I spent hours compiling everything: screenshots of suspicious transfers, scans of forged signatures, emails from collectors, even the metadata from documents that showed when and where they were created. My banking days had trained me to think like an investigator, and soon I had a digital folder so airtight it could have walked straight into a courtroom. Step 2 was securing myself. I contacted my old colleague, Richard, who now worked as a financial crimes consultant. We hadn't spoken in years, but the moment I told him what I had, his voice turned serious. He walked me through freezing my accounts, securing my social security number, and flagging my credit with the major bureaus. Amanda could try to keep using my name, but from that moment forward, every attempt would set off alarms. Step 3 was the part that made my heart race, letting Amanda know, in my own quiet way, that the game was over. I sent her a single email, short, professional. Attached was one document, the home equity loan with her forged version of my signature. I didn't accuse, didn't beg, didn't explain. I simply wrote, Amanda, I suggest you take a close look at this, more where this came from. For hours, I stared at my inbox, waiting, and then it came, the reply. At first, it was indignant denial. Then it shifted into excuses, blaming stress, blaming Cole, blaming anything but herself. Finally, as if she realized none of it was landing, her words grew panicked. Mom, please, we can fix this. Don't make it worse. That was the moment the power shifted. For the first time in years, she was the one scrambling, and I was the one standing tall. But I wasn't done. With Richard's guidance, I forwarded the entire file of evidence to a lawyer he recommended, a woman known for handling elder fraud cases. Within a week, Amanda received an official notice an investigation was being opened, and she would need to provide documentation for every account linked to my name. The shockwave hit immediately. Cole called me something he hadn't done in months, his voice dripping with a false calm, as he urged me to think about the family. Amanda sent messages late at night, each one more desperate than the last, trying to twist guilt back onto me. But the days when I bent under their pressure were gone. And here's the twist Amanda never saw coming while she had been trying to erase me. I had quietly positioned myself to erase her power instead. The firm grip she thought she had on my finances, my life, my future, it all crumbled the moment I took control. For years, I was the one underestimated, treated as invisible. Now, the silence was hers, and it was only the beginning of the reckoning she had earned. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest and, strangely, most liberating of my life. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of Amanda's moods and needs, bending myself into someone smaller just to keep the peace. But once I took control, the dynamic shifted forever. The investigation moved quickly. With the documentation I had provided, the forged signatures were undeniable. The fraudulent accounts tied back to her, not me. Creditors who had once hounded me now turned their attention on Amanda and Cole. Their phones rang. Not mine. Their mailboxes filled with notices. Not mine. And for the first time in years, I opened my mailbox without that familiar knot in my stomach. Amanda tried to bargain with me, of course. At first, it was all apologies and tears, promises that she would change. When that didn't work, her words grew sharp, laced with anger and blame. But the difference was, I no longer carried it. I no longer let her words cut into me. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the weight of them. It wasn't about revenge for me. It was about freedom. Freedom from the endless cycle of being used, dismissed, and manipulated. Freedom from living as though my only worth came from what I could provide to others. For the first time in a long while, I felt the ground under my feet was solid. May, the innkeeper who had given me shelter that first night, became more than a landlord. She became a friend. She reminded me daily that life wasn't over just because my family had turned their backs. In fact, she insisted it was just beginning. And slowly, I started to believe her. I found myself waking up lighter, no longer bracing for the next demand or insult. I began taking long walks, cooking meals for myself simply because I wanted to, and even volunteering at the local library. The woman who had once been reduced to an afterthought was rediscovering her own voice, her own rhythm. Amanda and Cole faded into the distance. Their silence didn't sting anymore. It soothed. The absence of their chaos was its own kind of gift. I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their presence to be whole, because in losing them, I found myself again. And that, more than anything else, was the freedom I had been searching for. Looking back now, I can see that the night Amanda drove away was both an ending and a beginning. In that moment, I thought my world had collapsed. I thought I had lost the most important bond a mother could ever have. But what I truly lost was an illusion, the idea that my worth depended on someone else's recognition. The truth is, betrayal has a strange way of stripping life down to its core. It hurts, it shatters, and it leaves you raw. But it also reveals what's been hidden inside you all along. For me, it uncovered strength I had long forgotten, resilience that had been buried under years of sacrifice and silence. I realized that no matter how much love I poured into others, I could not make them see me, value me, or treat me with respect. That had to come from within. And once I claimed that for myself, everything began to change. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: you are stronger than the people who try to diminish you. You are more resilient than the betrayals that try to break you. And sometimes, the worst moment of your life can turn out to be the doorway to a better one. So if you're listening right now and you've ever felt abandoned, dismissed, or betrayed, hold on. Your story isn't over. You have more power than you realize, and you deserve a life that honors your worth. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If my journey resonates with you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us we are never as powerless as we think.